Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Eckerson Group webinar. I'm Jed Summerton, VP of Consulting for Eckerson Group, and I'll be your host and moderator today. This is our second community forum, a special type of webinar that we have designed for interaction with our audience, which means you. Our forums discuss unique topics that are critical to modern data-driven organizations, and our panelists are all experienced practitioners who have lived through and helped shape some of the most valuable analytics solutions in the world. Let me start by saying that we have designed our community forum to be a bit different from a standard webinar in three ways. Our lead-in presentation will be short, about 15 to 20 minutes. It is intended to identify some key insights and issues, pose some leading questions, and propose a path towards solutions, but not specific solutions. We welcome comments and suggestions and questions from the audience throughout our time together, and I'll cover those logistics in a minute. And third point is this forum is 100% Eckerson Group. We do not have a vendor sponsor, so we don't have prescriptive answers to your questions. Instead, we'd like to hear from you as to what works well for you in your situation or questions that you have about your situation. As you can see from the slide, today is part 2 in a series of forums with a goal to start the new year with topics that we hope will lead you toward 2020 vision into data and analytics. Last month, we talked about the modern data analytics organization. Today, we'll discuss bringing business and IT together. And in March, we'll talk about how to succeed with self-service analytics, a leading topic in leading organizations today. Please note that we offer a free companion report for you to download and consume at your leisure. The report goes into more detail in some areas that you may find particularly relevant. And we also have a free tool that you can use to survey and assess your organization for how well business and technical people are working together. These are posted on our website, and after our discussion, you will receive links to them along with a link to the recording of this session. But before we jump in, first let me introduce you to the Eckerson Group. We are a full-service analytics organization, starting with our thought leadership founded by Wayne Eckerson to understand and what the leading needs of businesses in the industry are today, what they're doing to solve them, some of the tools and practices, and how they're organizing for effective delivery to meet analytic needs. We also have a full-service consulting organization, which I lead, to deliver those practices into organizations to help accelerate their analytics program. And we have educational workshops available to you to delve in deeper to specific topics. And on the next slide, we have a list of companies we've had the honor and privilege to serve recently, and you can browse those. But we've been very fortunate to have some leading opportunities in a lot of leading corporations, and we welcome those opportunities wherever they may come. And then finally, let me introduce our panelists. First, our presenter in the center, Dave Wells, is an advisory consultant, educator, and industry analyst dedicated to building meaningful connections through the path from data to business value. He works at the intersection of information management and business management, driving business impact through analytics, business intelligence, and active data management. Mike Lampa on the right side is a senior consultant in data architecture, master data management, advanced analytics, and how to adopt analytic insights into business practices. Having worked as a leader inside of Fortune 100 companies, Mike has lived the challenges of bringing business and IT people together. He is now a certified group facilitator and a certified SAFE program consultant for the Scaled Agile Framework for Enterprise, or SAFE. I, Jed Summerton, will double as a moderator and a panelist, contributing my experience as a longtime data and analytics consultant, and also former VP of Data and Analytics in a Fortune 200 healthcare provider. Now, before Dave sets our discussion with some background and perspectives, I'd like to cover some logistics. First, we intend for Dave's presentation to identify some key insights and issues and pose some leading questions, but we're not offering prescriptions here, but rather ideas for you to consider and discuss in this forum. So number 2 means we want to hear from you. To that end, we will take a few polls during the webinar, one at the beginning and one in the middle, and we'll report out the results for your discussion. We also welcome comments and questions from the audience at any time. If you have a question or idea to contribute, send it to me by using the Q&A box at the bottom center of your window. You don't have to wait for Dave to finish. You can submit your questions anytime. Lastly, if you have any challenge with Zoom or video, use the chat function to send a message to our webinar admins, Deb Perrier and Sterling Vernon. So once again, thank you for joining. We are glad to have you today, and we're looking forward to diving into today's live production. Over to you, Dave.
Thank you, Jed. As already introduced, our topic today is bringing business and IT together. This is an interesting topic to me, and one that I have struggled with through something more than 50 years of working with data and computer systems, both on the IT side and the business side. I really want to emphasize the subtitle here. We're looking for practical steps to improve working relationships, because those business IT relationships are so critical now in creating the culture that's necessary to let analytics succeed. But before we get into the presentation, I want to begin with the first poll that just gets us a sense of who do we have online? Who are the attendees here, and what do we look like as far as a mix of business and IT? So this poll, for just a few minutes, please respond quickly, and then we'll see the results. This is pretty interesting. We have 70% of our attendees say they're a blend of business and IT. Only 9% purely a business person. I think it's good news that we have business people on here. And I also think it's great that we have such a high percentage of people who see themselves as both business and IT. This is one of the things we need to do, is sort of erase that distinction between business and IT from being as extreme and as abrupt as it has been in the past. Mike or Jed, any comments on these results?
Well, I think it's terrific that we're seeing a blend of business and IT, and people identify that way, because that goes to the heart of what we're talking about today, Dave.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll elaborate.
Yeah, that's encouraging to me too. That's indicative potentially that more and more analytics are being done in a self-service mode, perhaps.
Yeah, so maybe that is indicative of what's really happening in our analytics world today, is that those barriers have to break down, because as we move into self-service, as we move into business people taking ownership of their own data, their own analytics, finding their own answers, that traditional business IT border doesn't work any longer. So let me move us along then and take a look at what we're dealing with here. This is some old humor. This is from the early days of my career. And the reason I put this cartoon up is to show that we've known for many, many decades that this problem exists. And our response to it was to make jokes about it. And maybe joking about it isn't the thing that's going to resolve the problem. This was a little bit later. This tended to be late 70s, this cartoon about a project as proposed by the sponsor, specified in the project request, designed by the analyst, produced by the programmers. This speaks to our failure to communicate effectively with all of the stakeholders in a project, and our failure to really work together and collaborate and cross that business IT boundary. The sad thing is that cartoon has simply been updated, colorized, and translated to a language. So I guess the message now is the problem still exists. We have not eliminated the problem. We continue to think of business and IT as separate entities, and we continue to talk about the business IT gap or the business IT divide. And that's one of the things that I think is at the heart of the problem we have. We talk about the business IT divide. We don't talk about the business finance divide. We don't talk about the business marketing, the business sales divide. IT is every bit as much a part of business as marketing or sales or finance. So let's stop behaving as if IT is something distinct and different and outside the core of business functional areas. We need to get rid of this divide. And the reality is that business and technology are both complex things. And it's probably some of that complexity that contributes to the heart of the problem that we're wrestling with here. We think about today, yes, business and technology are still both complex things, and both get increasingly complex. But today, they're intertwined in a way that we're never going to decouple them again. They're irrevocably intertwined in such a way that we have new kinds of complexities. But somewhere in the middle of this knot of interwoven business and IT activity, this is where data science lives. This is where analytics lives. So if we want to be successful in this age of analytics and data science, we really need to resolve this thing. It is urgent that we get rid of this business IT divide. So as I described in the ebook that's available, IT people must become more business literate. It says IT people need to understand the methods that are used in business, whether it's BPM or CRM or human resources management, supply chain management, whatever it is in methods, IT people need to understand them. And this reminds me of a consulting project that I was drawn into several years back. There was a BPM project, and I was pulled in as a consultant to find out why this project was constantly going off the rails. And it turned out that the sponsor of the project, when he said BPM, meant business performance management. And the IT lead on the project, when he heard BPM, heard business process management. So this underscores not only the need for understanding, but the need for effective communication. So we need to understand the methods. We need to understand the functions, all of the things that go on is financial management, R&D, marketing, sales, customer care, etc. IT people need to understand those things, and they need to understand many of the purposes in business management: audits and controls, compliance and risk management, governance, ethics, mission fulfillment, value creation, profit. You need to understand all of these things in several contexts. We need to know who does it, why they do it, what activities are involved, what are the key issues, what are the measures, what results are produced, and we need to understand the language of business. A superficial understanding of that language does more harm than good. Really understanding it is what is critical. But it's not just a problem of IT people needing to understand business. It's also a problem of business people needing to become more tech savvy. So if we look at a technology stack that starts with hardware and compute platforms at the bottom of the stack, data science at the top of the stack, and many things in between with operating systems and data storage and data sources and data resource management and so on, each one of those things is part of the complexity of IT. And when business people can understand the role or the purpose of each level of the technology stack, if they have a good feel for what they can do when it works and what they can't do when it fails, then that's the beginning of understanding that IT is complex, knowing what other technologies it depends on and what other technologies depend on it, knowing what are the difficulties, the challenges, and the risks in this complex technical world. IT people become more business literate, business people become more tech savvy. These are individual actions that each and every one of us can take to have a good understanding of how we contribute to closing this divide. So if every one of us would simply take a look at this, do this assessment, say, where am I strong? Where do I have gaps? Where do I need to learn more? That would be a big step forward. But we're not going to solve it all with individual steps. We also need to think some about organizational steps and what we do as an organization. So what I have created here is a view of how to align organizations systematically, a continuous improvement process just like other continuous processes. But this is a process about business IT alignment. So on one axis, we have working relationships. They're at the heart of this whole problem. And working relationships have three main categories: the processes, the relationships among people, and the skills that we bring. Another axis has effectiveness. And effectiveness has three main components: governance, competency, and communication. The third dimension of this is the continuity dimension. It's the idea that we have to identify misalignment, We have to take action to improve the alignment, and then we need to sustain it. So if I think about how this all fits together, the 3x3 working relationships intersected with effectiveness gives me 9 cells, and in each of those cells, 3 activities that I can perform to identify, to align, and to sustain. So there are 27 things in this simple diagram that we can do to step up to this problem and begin to improve it. The way we're going to put this to work is in a continuous improvement process, just like we've seen for so many other continuous improvement processes. We need to start with measurement. We need to measure business IT alignment. Now that sounds like a tall order, but with a great deal of thought and some guidance from a gentleman named Jerry Luffman, I've come up with a mechanism for measuring this that perhaps it's an imperfect mechanism, but it's better than no measures. So we begin with measurement. We use those measures to identify the trouble spots. We do enough analysis to identify the root causes of those problems. What action to take to improve alignment. We take those actions, and then we go back and measure again. The one thing I want you to observe most importantly about this diagram is that there's one way in and no way out. This isn't an alignment project. This is an alignment lifestyle. So we need to step up to it in that way and think about, on a continuing basis, keeping our business and IT activities, interests, communications, behaviors, working relationships, all aligned to the point where it becomes cultural and the line between business and IT becomes so fuzzy that we can't tell one from the other. So the measurement mechanism says, if I take the working relationships axis and the effectiveness axis and I intersect them, I'm going to distribute weighted measures across those in this way. Each of the things on the perimeter is 10% of the measurement. At the center, I've weighted relationship competency at 20% because that is really at the heart of what this is all about. The other thing that is built into this measurement model is that as we get more granular in each of these 9 cells, we have to ask what drives the mechanics and the behaviors and the events of business IT working relationships. And it's 3 things. It's what we think, what we say, and what we do. And you can see the distribution of values there. 30% of it is about what we think, 30% of it is about what we say, and 40% is about what we do. And that's based on the premise that actions speak louder than words. So based on all of that work, I built a survey. Consists of 100 statements, and each of those statements maps to one of the cells here and one of the points, what we think, what we say, what we do. So there is a direct correspondence between the statements and the measurement points in that matrix. And each survey participant responds twice. They say it's always, sometimes, or never true for business. And they say it's always, sometimes, or never true for IT. So we have business people sharing their perceptions about business people sharing their perceptions about IT. We have IT people sharing their perceptions about business, IT people sharing their perceptions about IT. And much of the things that we learn and business people, IT people, about their own organizations and about the other organizations. So ultimately the process is one, pardon me, of aggregating this data in such a way that we can look at it and see the highs and the lows. There aren't any absolute right numbers to aim for here. The goal is to see if I have some things that scored extremely high, those are strengths. If I have some things that scored extremely well, those are weaknesses. The question is, how do I leverage my strengths? How do I remediate my weaknesses? And that's where I get to the action part. So again, the process, identify the trouble spots. The trouble spots are going to be those extremely low ratings. Identify root causes. That's going to be a lot of communication, interviewing, exploring with people who responded to find out what's really at the heart of this. Then we can determine what actions to take those actions, and measure again. So that's a very high-level look at what's detailed in some depth in the ebook, and that survey is also available. The one other thing I would say with regard to that measurement process and that survey is if you add lots of demographics to it, you can see it by department, you can see it by length of tenure and so on. And then you load all of that data into an OLAP cube. So with that, I believe we're ready to move to question and answer and panel discussion. And so I'll kick it back to Jed to lead the panel discussion.
Well, you bet. Well, thank you, Dave. I learned something every time I hear you speak, so appreciate you sharing that with us. And I've also turned on a video, and I hope you folks can see our shining visage. And Dave's there, and Mike will join shortly as well. And a question that comes in is, Dave, how much does organization matter here? Can we still have, business people in the business organization, IT people in the IT organization, and still make this work?
I believe we can. I believe we will, but I also believe we will see a natural, over the coming decade or so, shrinking of the separate IT organization. And the reason I think that's true has little to do with this problem of business IT divide and more to do with the realities of where we're going with the technologies today. The IT organizations of the past built applications, deployed applications, managed and operated applications, managed and operated the infrastructure upon which those applications built. Today, many of those applications are software as a service. Today, much of the infrastructure is cloud. So I see the IT organization of the future becoming one that is more involved in procurement of services, procurement of applications, management of service level agreements, and that sort of thing. So yes, organizationally, we still need a distinct IT organization, I believe, but we need to reshape the relationship of that IT organization in terms of where it fits into the entire business hierarchy.
Right. Follow-up question to that one, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit to link it, is we're a geographically distributed organization where IT and business people are in different locations, and some of them are grouped in remote offices, but by and large, IT is separated geographically from the business organizations. And your center point here is relationship competency. What are some ideas that you have that we might be able to build that up despite the geography? And it's nice to be able to talk to people in the hallway and get to build the relationship a little bit instead of making everything a business phone call. But how can we overcome some of that?
That's a real challenge. And you know from Eckerson Group, Jed, that we're a geographically distributed organization. You're in Colorado, I'm in Seattle, Wayne's in the Boston area.
Mike's in Texas.
Yeah, Mike's in Texas. Deb's in Pennsylvania. So we're all over the place. How do we deal with this? We're not necessarily struggling with business and IT, but the heart of making it work is constant communication. So we get on Zoom meetings, we email one another, we use Slack, we text message, we constantly communicate, and we get together face to face when we're able to get together face to face. But I think every one of us acknowledge that being geographically dispersed brings some challenges, and we each have some responsibility to work with those challenges and to make sure that we communicate effectively. And relationship competency, communication is right at the heart of that.
Fair enough. Mike, what are some of your perspectives?
Well, one thing is we got one question that came in, and it's pretty critically important to the participant who's trying to establish an enterprise governance and stewardship program. And it's been going about 3-4 years with very little measurable progress or attention. And it's because the person leading this charge is in the CIO's IT organization, not in the business. What observations do you two guys have from a standpoint of getting that traction within an enterprise with governance and stewardship? Not a real exciting thing, but a very critical thing, data governance.
Oh, but it could be.
Right? Yeah. Oh, yeah, right. Especially if you run into problems. What's your thought there, with a governance program being driven out of the CIO's office?
Well, I see it as a challenge,
Yep.
but I've done it successfully. When I was as I said, at a Fortune 200 healthcare provider, and data governance was seen as a bureaucracy, perceived as bureaucracy. I don't want to have to go do that. Until we started delivering it as a service and said, hey, we see, based on our knowledge of the business, you folks have these kinds of pain points because your data don't line up, and you're always trying to figure out how right can I get my numbers and get them to a trusted state, and then they don't match somebody else's who is equally convinced that their numbers are trusted as well. And if those are pain points across the organization, the data governance folks can step in and say, hey, we can help you solve that. Now, we can't come up with the right business definitions and how you folks are going to agree and what you're going to align on, but once you do, we can make sure that we can figure out how to get your numbers to align or reconcile if they happen to be different because you have different focuses or purposes in your business. Mm-hmm. And we found that if we were able to offer that as a problem-solving service to facilitate that across the organization, because IT is horizontal in the business, then people started coming to those data governance meetings, and they started canceling other meetings so they could come to them because they just wanted to get out of pain. Mm-hmm. And we were able to build that. And that was also an exercise in the IT people understanding more about the business because they were part of those conversations, directly to Dave's point. And also the business people started understanding all the different data sources and the challenges that IT had in reconciling this. And they became more technically clear about exactly what they want, when they wanted it, how they wanted it processed. So it helped move the organization forward, both in terms of data quality and in business relationships. So a double benefit there, even though we facilitated that from inside the IT organization. Now, we think data governance is a business function. Sometimes IT just has to be the facilitator and get things going.
Yeah, being kind of the steward of it. I'm thinking also, we've got some tipping points coming at us with these privacy regulations that are being rolled out as primarily on the heels of GDPR out of Europe. So I got a feeling there's going to be a common cause across the business organization and IT. Maybe today there isn't that common vision and cause, and a great opportunity, perhaps, Dave, to see if the reason I'm not getting a lot of that traction is because I got some serious misalignment going on.
I think there is some potential that you have serious misalignment. I think there is often some baggage to overcome with past data governance efforts where sometimes those who were the data governors were viewed as the data police, and it created a negative perception. So I think it's really important that modern data governance become a collaborative process, and as Jed mentioned, data governance as a service. Look at how data governance can help projects and help people instead of just being a controlling and a policing organization. And that begins by focusing governance on prevention instead of enforcement of policies. And right at the heart of that is to believe that most people want to do the right thing. The job of governance is to help them know what the right thing is and make it as easy to do as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I've got a question, Dave, here. I like the idea, and I'm picking up on the idea that the survey moves me away from having subjective measures to more objective kind of measures. What's the recommendation for the frequency and cadence of redoing a survey so that I kind of build a continuous alignment program here?
I think initially, if you're dealing with a great deal of misalignment, you probably want to be doing it somewhere between 2 and 4 times a year. I think as you get farther down the path and begin to make progress and see improvement, less frequency is okay, and maybe get it to the point of being annual. But initially, if you have a lot of problems to address and a lot of action that needs to be taken, I think higher frequency is better.
Yeah. Also lets you start to see your progress, you're trending.
Right.
You know, which way are you trending?
Yeah, exactly. It's good if you're going to take these kinds of actions to get some frequent feedback.
So Dave, I got a somewhat loaded question for you here. What if the person I'm working with is a real, I'll just say jerk, and
Okay.
they're the smartest guy in the room. They think they know everything. They got this covered. They really don't want to talk to the IT guys. And how do we deal with that kind of situation?
You're going to run into those jerks in any situation, and you're not going to change them by direct pressure. So the thing to understand is that when we're talking about working relationships, they're based on human behaviors, and the only person whose behavior you can change directly is yourself. So if you want to change the behaviors of others, you do it indirectly by changing how you react to their behaviors. And the reason I hesitated over that word react is because I want to take a concept out of what I've learned in Buddhist study and say, don't react, respond. So if you can change your behavior such that when that person is acting like a jerk, you acknowledge even beneath the jerk behavior, there's generally some heartfelt perceptions and maybe some facts in what they're doing. So respond to the truth in it and don't react to the manner in which they deliver the message. Respond to the truth in the message and acknowledge their jerk behavior, because that simply rewards it. Change your own behavior, and it may be a long, slow process, but over time you'll see a change in their behavior.
Well, building on that, we have another question just came in. What do you think about the strategy of starting with a small pilot project, working on taking a new approach, working with a combined business and IT team to make little advances in as many fronts as possible? Set up the baseline. You could do it in governance, you could do it in data quality, data cataloging, or in the others, and eventually grow out to a more mature environment. Does that tend to work? Does it tend to scale? Does it tend to take off?
Personally, I think it's okay to do proof of concept, proof of value kinds of projects. To try it on a small basis, you won't change the big organizational divide with a small project, but you'll plant the seeds and you'll get a handful of people who know not just academically, but experientially what it takes to do this and what the challenges are. And maybe that handful of people then becomes your leaders, your coaches, your guides, your advocates for taking it on a bigger scale.
Yeah, I'll go along with it too. You might be able to incubate some organizational alignment capabilities and memory muscle with a small project, highly cross-functional and self-contained team where you've got technical folks and business folks all working together, as a named and organized team, and build out some techniques and capabilities and communication processes and practices potentially.
think that's a really good point, and maybe that suggests that we've already, in some instances, done some of this in those organizations that have become particularly successful with Agile projects. We've already this business IT collaboration on a project scale. Now the question is, how do we take it up to a grander scale?
Right.
That might be a good question for you, Mike, since you're at that SAFe certification. And does Agile versus Waterfall really make a difference here?
Yeah, well, and that's where the scaled part of the scaled Agile framework comes in, is that you build upon the technical team agility, where you're driving releases over the course of 10 weeks, continuously delivering working software every 2 weeks. And then as you scale it up into the enterprise, you're getting to the point where you're doing your strategic planning on a 12-month horizon, your prioritization for the next releases on a 9-month horizon. The business and the technology teams are working together for all that planning. And then the execution on a set of ceremonies and cadence that creates full transparency from the executive vision all the way down to the execution, and full transparency from execution all the way back up. Where are we on our working software builds? And you have these cross-functional teams working constantly together. I know my strategy. I've been empowered. I've got autonomy to get the work done, and we're all working towards a common purpose. Those kinds of things I've seen be absolutely phenomenal in helping organizations just become much more consistent and reliable, producing quality and on a much quicker frequency.
Cool. Well, here's a question about measurement. Dave, you've got the survey, and that's a good way to establish a baseline, and I presume I could repeat that every 6 months or 12 months and see if scores improve. Are there any other ways to measure the closeness of the business IT relationship, the collaboration, and those sorts of things?
I'm certain there are other ways to measure. The question is how to put together the tools to do the measurement, because the reality here is we're not measuring tangibles, we're measuring intangibles. We're measuring people's thoughts, perceptions, beliefs, and measuring intangibles is a difficult thing to do in a concrete way. So that's the reason I put together a survey to get people's responses, their gut level responses to what they think about their own organization and about other organizations. Maybe if we wanted to look for something other than a survey, we'd have to look for some proxy measures. So, for example, if we go back to the struggle to get data governance launched, to struggle to get data governance some traction, maybe the simple count of frequency of attendance at data governance meetings is a proxy measure. Maybe active participation in those meetings, who speaks up and who just sits there, maybe that's a proxy measure. So there are probably some things that we can get less subjective, less survey-based measures through observation. And I don't have off the top of my head a list of those things, but I suspect with some thought we could come up with several. And the things we observe might be very specific to the organization where we're trying to wrestle with the problem. So if the organization is struggling with data governance, that may be a good place to observe it. If they're struggling with project prioritization, that might be a good place to observe it. So some thought into what are the specific symptoms of misalignment and what things we might observe to use as proxy measures based on those symptoms may be useful.
Well, Dave, I do a lot of work in healthcare, and how we treat a patient is one thing. Of course, we measure that, and charge for it typically. But what they're really interested in is the outcomes. Is the patient getting better? Is there improved quality of life? In projects, are there some measures, or maybe like you've seen some of your Agile work, where you can actually see an outcome of a project that is better when collaboration is higher, and maybe not as good. And is there a correlation that says collaboration really makes a difference? Because sometimes collaboration might be great and the project still fails, right? Or vice versa. So do you see in your practice, even if you haven't got direct data, do you see that collaboration tends to lead to better outcomes?
Well, it definitely produces a lot better fruit, because as with any kind of project, we might think we know everything at the onset of the project, and by golly, it's only going to take us 3 months, and we're going to produce $15 million in incremental revenue, for our organization. And then we get into it and we realize we don't have entitlement to half of the data we thought we were going to have. So now you're in this collaborative mode of, well, what's the best value I can deliver, given we've learned a lot more, so that I am producing some kind of contributive output back to the business. So when you get into that mode of, well, we got a team here ready to do work. We thought we were going to deliver the whole enchilada, but it looks like we're only going to be able to do a couple tamales and some rice and beans. But that still gives me some value. I'm still putting food on the table, right? And the other thing too is at the end of work streams, it's really critical not only to measure the actual business value that was produced and how much of the software is working software versus having defects in it, but you also do a participant engagement kind of survey to Dave's point, because you need to know how the people are feeling. What's the level of engagement, and then most importantly, if you're following a lean mindset, I'm going to plan, do, check, and act. So what did I identify that I can improve? And let's build that into the scope of the next project. So I'm showing an investment back into the people to improve processes for them. And call each other out if you're seeing that somebody's not collaborating. Let's figure out how to get better collaboration, or let's figure out how to maybe swap out some team members.
Yeah, those are some pretty drastic measures. But building on one of those points is another question that comes in. How do you know when to collaborate, and how to when just to move on, just take a decision? Because there's, even between the lines of the question, there's pros and cons, right? You got to move on, but you might run roughshod over some stakeholders who feel they weren't fully collaborated with or what have you, and that could actually be a setback in the long run. So how do you know how to gauge that situation? Or are there practices that we could use to, some guidelines or principles of when you have to take a decision versus when it's best to, sit back and work through it and take the time to really get to as best consensus as you can?
You just hit on that word there, Jed. Getting to consensus is not majority, right?
Right.
So, when you're running these stalemates, so this goes back to the group facilitation training. Getting to consensus is getting everybody to voice their piece, and then see if you can get the group to get to the point where everybody can nod their head to the following question: can you live with this? Right? And sometimes it's not the perfect answer, but you don't alienate somebody by going to a majority rule kind of thing, right? And get everybody at least to get to a point of, yeah, we can live with it. I'd say, all right, now I'll take that governance recommendation. Let's move on.
Yeah, voting
that's right at the heart. Consensus is not everybody agrees this is best. Consensus is everybody can live with it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And if you can't arrive at consensus, you have bigger problems than we can fix with a simple alignment exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fair enough. There is definitely art and science in this. And Dave, I think you just correctly pointed out that, capabilities for relationships in the center of your diagram and highest weighted. I think it makes absolute sense. And to that end, you mentioned earlier, Dave, that Eckerson is a distributed organization, but we also take some time to develop relationships when we can. There's a little bit of banter at the beginning of our group meetings, even though they're by video, and just getting to know each other. How was, a little bit of sharing about how was your weekend, what's coming up, what's challenging, and all that kind of stuff. And that consumes time during the meeting, and we don't necessarily get to all the business topics. But it certainly helps build trust and camaraderie across the team and bridge some of our differences in perspectives and validation of each other and those sorts of things. So it took me a while to realize that during my career, because I always wanted to get right to business, but without the relationships, business always doesn't proceed. So in those kinds of situations, if you do have relationships, what I found is that people are more willing to say, I can live with that, than they are to say, sorry, I didn't get my way, and then I take my ball and go home.
And I had a voice.
Yeah, and I had a voice.
Yeah, which is critical. Worst thing to have happen is to have a perception when you're part of a collaborative team to not have a voice in the process. Right. Why bother?
The other thing that I think we do well at Eckerson Group is sometimes we stop working to talk about how we work, how we get the work done. And I think that's a healthy thing that can work toward alignment, can help to foster collaboration. Just by understanding, each person understanding the other's points of view.
Yeah, without doing that Saturday Night Live skit, right? Fair enough. Do we have any other questions from the folks in the audience? We've still got a few minutes here. And if so, we'll get to them. And if not, then we'll give you a few minutes back in your day. Either way, we appreciate you joining in and listening and contributing from the folks who did ask. But I'll give you 30 seconds more or so to come up with additional questions if you have them.
And, here we got one. How much does the actual organizational model matter? Do we have to do some actual departmental reorganizations and create additional dotted lines or solid lines? How much does that play into this alignment as maybe actions to be taken?
I think we start out simply by working with the organization as it is and accept the organization and that it exists and try to improve working relationships and communication within that organizational structure. If as we go through the process and we take the measures, there are indicators for some tweaks and tuning of the organization, then I think maybe we take the cues from those indicators. But I don't think wholesale reorganization is really going to improve alignment. I think it's simply going to shuffle the pieces on the board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. And boy, how many companies have I been in where?
Well, speaking of shuffling, I'll share an experience of my previous life, and this was 20-some years ago, where I was running a rather large data and analytics shop, and we're moving into a new corporate headquarters. And they said, okay, this is the hall for the data and analytics team. This is part of the floor. I said, don't want that. And they said, what? And I said, well, what I'd like to do is for my data people to sit with their customers. And they will always come back and find each other, and we'll have meetings as appropriate. But I want them to get to know their customers, build those relationships, and really get to understand the nuance of their business so that when a question comes up in the middle of the night, they have a little bit more informed view of, do I need to get this back up, this database, or do I need to get this ML ops or whatever it is back up 5 minutes, because if we don't, we'll lose revenue, or can I take 15 minutes to really fix it and not have to come back in the morning and then refix it again and disrupt things again. So those kinds of questions can be very helpful if you sit with your people. If you have that, if you're not geographically dispersed, segment your teams, put it out to the customers if you're in the IT organization. And if you're on the business side, maybe you can provide a desk for some IT folks amidst your business team, because that can go a long way to just improving just human nature.
Great.
Okay, I don't see any further questions, so I greatly appreciate everybody joining with us. Thanks for sticking with us for the duration, and we'll give you a few minutes back and look forward to seeing you perhaps on our next webinar in a month or so, as you saw at the beginning. Stay tuned, because we will send you the ebook or the downloadable article, as well as a survey that you can take. It's an Excel form now, and you might want to put some additional questions around it to say what part of the organization you're from, look at the demographics of the people you're surveying, and so you know whether they are business or IT and those sorts of things. And you can identify pockets of where things are going well and where things probably need a little more attention. So in closing, I'd like to say we hope you found this was a good use of your time. And if you did, feel free to forward the links to others if you so desire. And if you have any feedback for us, please send us directly to Wayne, because he likes to see this stuff, Wayne@Eckerson.com. And we would appreciate getting some of your feedback, any suggestions you have that would make this sort of webinar and community forum more valuable for you. And I thank you very much, and looking forward to seeing you in our next community forum. Take care.